Fáilte Road, fáilte go Ládarg, Shoppa in Lochgarman. Kieran O'Brien is my name. I'm here with Wally O Neill, the manager and proprietor of Red Books in Wexford town, a notable establishment for book lovers and readers and writers, poets and characters in Wexford town. And there's a couple of questions I just want to put to Wally now today, just so we can get to know the Wally, the man, rather than Wally, the shopkeeper. So Wally, tell us, where did it start for you then? What was your first book that you read, and how did you get into having a love for books?
For me, I always loved books. I was introduced to them early by my father. I think the first book I can remember reading, and I read it so much that the covers came off, was an old version of Peter Pan. And I actually came across an identical copy in perfect condition maybe 2 years ago, and that's the only other copy of it I've ever seen. I would have read a lot of, I suppose, children's versions of the classics early on. I loved Around the World in 80 Days, The Swiss Family Robinsons, all of those classics, just fantastic versions of Dickens. There's just so much.
So you mentioned there that your dad was an avid reader as well, but he was a builder, and so were you actually. So you started on the building sites.
That's right.
And would builders necessarily be reading books or what?
Yeah. I can remember my father and people who worked with him coming into the house on a Sunday afternoon. I clearly remember being very young and a guy walking in with a mail bag full of paperbacks and just emptying out on the floor, and they divided the books up between them, and it was every type of book. I mean, everything from paperback westerns to histories of the Second World War, to things that you mightn't expect, like maybe Joyce, O'Brien, Lawrence. It was all sorts, and there was always that fascination. And I think somewhere in the last 30 years, maybe it was the Celtic Tiger, maybe it was something else, the idea of reading became somewhat uncool among young men, and now I think that's changed again at this stage. But when I was on the sites, I know there would have been a lot of guys who wouldn't have read, just because they thought, this isn't really the thing to do. And I don't know where that came from, but it was certainly there. Maybe it came from the schools. I don't actually know. But luckily, we're seeing a huge influx of young people coming into the shop now. You can see them every day coming into Red Books and reading absolutely every type of book going.
From the building sites then, you started off another business, you were telling me one time, before you got into having a bookshop. Can you tell us about that then?
Yeah, so the crash came in 2008 and we managed to keep going until 2009. I guess we thought we'd be able to ride out the recession. There was no way of escaping it though, and we were annihilated like many others. I think it is the big economic crash of our time. It was the 1929 of our time, and it had a profound effect on us, because suddenly you went from being useful to society to being completely useless. I had really no other qualifications, and I suppose I was very angry. And once again, whenever things were tough in my life, I would turn to books, and I turned to books and reading for solitude again. And I ended up in several different jobs over the recession. I ended up in a call centre, which I didn't like, and I suppose that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I had decided at that stage that I wasn't going to work for anybody else again. I then set up a delivery business, and I was at that for some time, and things kind of, there was a few unfortunate incidents that happened, and through several accidents I ended up opening a bookshop in a shed in Bridgetown, which I suppose seemed insane to everybody else around me. I had a lot of people question my sanity at that stage, but it just worked. It was like everything else was leading to that point.
Well, I remember when you opened up in Bridgetown just before Christmas, 6 years ago, I think.
Hmm.
An unusual venture in a small village in South County Wexford to open up a bookshop in what had been a shed. But you did it, and you set up and quickly filled with books, actually, and began to attract customers. And what motivated you then to decide to move into Wexford Town?
Well, Bridgetown was great. It was a very small building. If anyone remembers it, it was a shed off the dwelling house of Nora Doyle's dwelling house, and Nora was a brilliant landlord. She couldn't have done enough for us, and she had great ideas for the village. I mean, you were with me when we were doing the Kathleen Brown Festival. She had great ideas for bringing a lot of art, a lot of literature into that village. I guess it was difficult to make money out of selling books when you're. It's always difficult to make money out of selling books, but when you're in the middle of nowhere out in the country, it's really difficult, and it was very seasonal. And we decided, I suppose, the only way we were going to survive was to move into a population centre. So, in 3 years ago today, the 14th of August 2019, we opened Red Books in Wexford Town, and again, very similar to opening Red Books in Bridgetown. I didn't know if it was going to work. There was a good chance it wasn't going to work. Several people told me it wouldn't work. It's amazing how many people, experts, will come out and tell you something won't work when you're trying it. And luckily it did work. We got very busy very quickly, and everything was going great. We'd set up writers groups, open mics here, and then COVID came along and closed us down.
I mean, it couldn't have been more difficult, actually, to start off a business a couple of months before COVID, having to have a stop-start sort of situation. But you expanded bit by bit in what was the original shop, and now you've opened up the major extension here. So the bookshop itself is attracting a lot of customers. And what do you find is your philosophy, if I wish, or if I call it that, or what's your strategy behind the bookshop? What is it you're trying to actually achieve?
A lot of people would ask us why we called the bookshop Red Books, and depending on what mood I'm in, I'll always give a different answer. Obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of people who think I'm some sort of a communist on the hill. I'll often tell people it's a pun on the word red. So a lot of our books have been read before. But I guess that the real reason is red was a flag of defiance long before there was ever such a thing as communism or socialism. Pirates would often raise a red flag when they were about to attack. Independent communities would use a red flag as their flag, where it was something that represent a certain defiance. And after the crash in 2008, I was very angry and very defiant against what I saw as the establishment. I was also very angry at the way bookselling was going. There was a creeping censorship coming into it. I found that a lot of books were starting to disappear. A lot of writers were starting to disappear. There was more and more blogs appearing. I remember reading a blog post at one stage from a 19-year-old girl, the 10 most misogynistic writers of all time, in which she named 10 of the greatest writers of all time. She made a point of saying in the article that she had never read any of them, but she decided that these people shouldn't be read, and she was spreading this without anybody really taking her to task on it. And among those authors was Jane Austen. And I thought this is ridiculous. And we had saw massive online platforms, namely Amazon, take over 80% of book selling, and at any point they could just decide to remove a book from existence and it wouldn't appear again. And most of the chain stores, even the independents that were left, were going to follow suit because they were relying on people like that to stock them. So I guess that's what Red Books was about. I thought it was going to be a place where we could build a community that was outside the establishment, where we would sell all books. We would never remove a book from the shelves, regardless of how much heat we got, how much hate mail we got about it. and we would do our own thing in our own way.
Well, that's pretty obvious coming into the shop. You have a huge variety of books, a huge selection, from fiction, non-fiction, poetry, history, crafts, hobbies, everything you could have mentioned. And you happen to be one of the few places that will sell you a book. You could buy the Quran, you could buy the Bible, you could buy the Bhagavad Gita, you could buy a book about Lenin, you can buy a book about Stalin, you can buy a book, even Hitler's Mein Kampf. Not that that's all that you sell, of course,
No.
but you do stock them. And I think that's important. I think people appreciate that. Now, since you've come in, you do attract unusual characters at times, I think. Bookshops and antique shops, I think, probably do. And you've had some sort of unusual experiences, I think, with some of your customers, I think. Have you?
It's an interesting job. You get to, I think, you get to meet the most interesting and the most eccentric people from society in a bookshop like this. And I'd have different theories as to why. I suppose there's very few places where people can congregate for any length of period anymore in society. And if you go into a coffee shop or a restaurant, you're expected to buy something, eat it, and get out. Social clubs have almost become a thing of the past, unless they have a very stringent purpose. And I think we do get people gathering here that I would almost say are refugees of society. We also get to meet the most creative people in society. So you have poets, writers, free thinkers will gather in a place like this, and you'll hear the most amazing conversations and theories about things. I'd also have another theory, a more metaphysical theory, that we have so many books here. I mean, we have 250,000 books in stock at the moment, not all in the shop, of course, but we would have tens of thousands of books in store. Many of them being handled, many of them are old, a couple of centuries old. They've been handled by multiple readers over the years, and there's a certain energy that many books in one place puts out that I think will draw people in. I've had several people over the years come into the shop on their lunch break, professional people, to ask me would it be okay, could they just walk around and look at the shelves during their lunch break, because they felt it calmed their mind. And these weren't degenerates. These were very people living and working in the upper echelons of the town. So I think there's definitely something to that theory as well.
Well, apart from selling books, of course, the shop is becoming, as you say, a centre for the literary arts and poets and maybe eccentrics as well. But you're carrying out some other activities at night time here now as well. Can you just explain what those are now?
Yeah, well, now that we've got over all the lockdowns and everything, our writers group has returned. So every Thursday night we have a writers group in store from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. And that will go on permanently now. We have several other events lined up. We do stay open late 2 nights a week at the moment, so it's a Thursday and a Friday night. We stay open till 9 p.m. We have a knitting and craft group that operates here independently on a Wednesday morning. We will have a book club starting up very soon, where we it'll be a book club with a difference in that we'll feature books that people have actively messaged me to withdraw from the shelves, and books that have been censored over the years, and books that I think have a lot to offer and shouldn't be allowed to disappear. We'll also have our open mic nights returning. We had events before lockdown called Live Lit, where we would focus on a particular writer, and people would come in and either read from that writer's canon or create their own interpretations inspired by that writer. And there's constantly people coming in and giving us other ideas. For instance, there was a man in this morning who wants to start a meditation group here, one of my best customers. And that's what a bookshop should be. It should be about more than being just a place that's open from 9 to 5 selling a few paperbacks. It has to be a community, a sanctuary.
And of course the great bookshops across the world, like Shakespeare and Company in Paris and City Lights and many others, even Parsons on the Quay, as it was in Dublin,
Yeah,
represented a bit more than just the commercialism around selling books. You also set up a publishing house called Red Books Press,
that's right.
and through that now, how many books have you actually published now?
I believe at this stage we're somewhere in the region of 20 books and some anthologies as well. And I mean, we've several others lined up that will come out this winter, which isn't bad considering we started at the height of the first lockdown. We have 3 permanent anthologies running at the moment. So we have the Wexford Bohemian as our kind of our flagship. The 3rd edition of that has just came out, and it's selling in record numbers. And that one is edited by Alana Hamill, a very inspiring and up-and-coming young Wexford writer. We also have Wexford Women Writing Undercover, which is a women's anthology that was originally founded on International Women's Day. And they've also brought out 3 editions, which cater for people all over the world. And that's edited by Deirdre McGarry. And then we have a children's anthology, which we've only had 1 edition of that out yet. But we are in the process of starting with the planning for submissions for issue 2. And that'll be kind of ran by Eilish McLaughlin, another young writer from Bridgetown.
Very good. And I mean, long may it last, and it gives a great opportunity to people to be able to go into print, to publish their writings or their poetry at a reasonable cost to them. And the books sell for a reasonable price, and they are primarily Wexford books and Wexford people, which is very important. I was in a book fair in Kilkenny recently, and one of the good collectors I was talking to, he's a major collector of books, he marvelled as to how many books are published in County Wexford. He said that apart from himself and another person in the county he was from, they were the only 2 that were actually writing anything at the time. So, I mean, Wexford certainly has an advantage there.
There's certainly something special going on in Wexford right across the county. We have people writing absolutely everything, and at a high standard. We've some, I think there's been more local histories published in Wexford per capita than any other county in the country, and we've some incredible local historians writing at the moment. You know, people like, we have Nicky Rossiter's new book here at the moment. It's selling very well. You know, there's people like Liam Gall, Des Keeley, Bernard Brown, just fantastic writers. And then we have creative writers. Dahi Kavanagh has just completed a dystopian trilogy. Dan Finn is writing very out there sci-fi cult stuff, with some great poets, fantasy writers, people writing romantic fiction, erotic fiction, every type of fiction imaginable. So I don't know if it's something in the water, but County Wexford is certainly in a literary renaissance.
Certainly is, and a lot of that goes down to the fact that writing books has a business element to it. Without booksellers and publishers, then people will probably never be published at all. But the future then, I mean, you're well established here now in Red Books. You have a very major shop, one of the biggest in Ireland, I think. Probably one of the biggest stocks of modern books, all the way down to antiquarian books, local Wexford books, and non-fiction as well. Where do you see the future then? Where would you like to see Red Books, say, in 5 years' time?
Well, we've been very lucky. I don't think I could have imagined that we would have came this far when we originally opened in Bridgetown. The day we opened, I can remember somebody who I would have a lot of respect for, and I was talking to them about putting a sign over that little shop, which was the smallest bookshop in Ireland, and they said, "I wouldn't bother if I was you. You'll be gone by Christmas." So you can never underestimate the power of readers, and it's readers who have brought us this far and kept us going. People who love books, and not necessarily people who just want to collect books, but people who love the written word, who are in love with bookshops. So anything is possible when you harness in that power. Certainly, we're currently in talks with Zeph Ryder about opening a branch of Red Books in Portugal. Zeph will open that. We'll supply him if we can. It's called Livro Tintos, and that will ensure that the name and the ethos of the bookshop will continue if anything was to happen to this one. And you know, we want to see more independent bookshops like this one set up around the country. We want to see more places that would abhor any form of censorship, that would go out of their way to try and make connections between local writers and local poets and publish them and get their books out onto the shelf, that would celebrate literary culture. And we'd help those people in any way to set up their own bookshops. We're not going to be gatekeepers. We want to see more bookshops, not less. We don't want to see the whole thing taken over by the likes of one online giant or two that can control what people read and what people think. That never ends well, and you know, we've experienced more hardship with censorship in this country than anywhere arguably in the world. So we know where censorship ends. It's never good. Salman Rushdie was attacked this weekend after 30 years of surviving a fatwa. Absolutely terrible, because people didn't like what he wrote. And Rushdie famously said that he never shied away from controversy. He never shied away from the real dangers that he faced. But he famously said that it was his job to argue, to keep the world awake, because Rushdie, like many other writers, like many other people who love books, realised that when censorship goes to its ultimate levels, when people are out in the streets burning books, when people are on Twitter cancelling out whole genres of fiction, that you'll have the same situation you had in Germany in the 1930s, when the world slowly went to sleep. Sense was lost, and it can only result in annihilation. And we're very close to it again.
Yeah, it is. Isn't it surprising, really, in the modern world, with all the liberalism and the improvements in the social side of life, that there's a commonality, a sort of a conformity creeping in, that almost a new type of censorship, that if you're not part of that mindset, you have no place at all. But you know, I've noticed myself when I've put up for sale on my website some books about the famine, and immediately I get quite a lot of responses telling me that it wasn't a famine, that I shouldn't be calling it a famine. And I'm trying to explain to people, well, I didn't write the book, I'm only selling the book, and you're in the same position, and you've had that recently as well, I think, have you?
I have it quite a lot. In the last 6 months, I've had it at more time than ever in our whole history. We're almost 6 years in business now. We're 3 years here, and I've never seen this level of intent to censor, to silence, to control what people are reading. I've been messaged nicely by some people, not so nicely by others. Many of them random people that don't even live in the area, who would never visit the bookshop, asking me to withdraw certain books, telling me they didn't like certain books that were on my website or that had appeared in Facebook posts or on pictures on various social media accounts. And I think it's because we're living in the great age of the ego, a time when, as one social media commentator says, attention is the new currency. And I think people have lost all sense of reason, and everybody thinks they're the center of the universe, and that they have the right to contact somebody like me, who's running a legitimate business, who's obviously not going to listen to threats about what I can and can't sell, and to ask me to withdraw books from the shelves. It's just that it's nonsense. I don't know where it's coming from, but I know where it's going to end.
What would you think if James Joyce came into the shop? What would he think of your shop? What would he say to you? What would you say to him?
I would say he'd probably ask me for a lend of money straight away, judging by accounts I've read of him. But I think he'd fit right in here, because Joyce, of course, spent a lot of time in the original Shakespeare Company in Paris with Sylvia Beach, and it was her that became his first real patron, and she certainly pushed his book. She was his fan. She saw something in him, and that there lies the responsibility of a bookshop, because if Beach hadn't have given Joyce somewhere to go, maybe we wouldn't have Ulysses today, and we wouldn't have that rich literary legacy that's come with it.
Thanks very much, Wally O Neill, manager and main force behind Red Books in Wexford and the literary revival of County Wexford, I think, at the moment. Go raibh maith agat, agus go raibh maith agat a Rory agus ar dahi. Tá Rory ag déanamh an scanan an seo. Slán agus bannacht.